The void of space stretched endlessly, littered with the debris of a battle long lost. Wreckage from Earth's once mighty fleet drifted among the shattered remains of alien warships, silent testaments to the carnage that had unfolded. Amidst it all, a single vessel still burned bright, the UNS Courage, a lone corvette standing defiant at the system's edge. Its hull was battered, its defenses crippled, but its engines refused to go dark. Inside, Commander Elias Vance stood unshaken. His uniform was torn, blood dried on his temple, but his grip on the command rail remained firm. The bridge was dim, emergency lights casting an eerie glow as sparks rained from damaged consoles. Around him, what remained of his crew worked frantically, their faces etched with exhaustion, yet no one spoke of retreat. The enemy loomed ahead, the Zarnok Armada, their towering warships forming an iron wall against the backdrop of distant stars. They had expected an easy hunt, a swift execution of the last human straggler. Instead, they found resistance. "Power to forward shields," Vance ordered, his voice steady despite the impossible odds. Lieutenant Rivera's fingers flew across the controls, rerouting dwindling energy reserves. Shields barely holding. Weapons systems at 30%. Not enough. Not by a long shot. But Vance had fought the Zarnok long enough to understand them. They respected only strength, saw retreat as weakness. If courage showed even the slightest hesitation, they would strike without mercy. The alien fleet began its advance. Hulking battleships moved into formation, their weapons charging with an ominous glow. Fighter swarms swirled like locusts, preparing to descend. A warning flashed across the screen, target lock detected. The Zarnok were done waiting. A lesser commander would have surrendered. A logical mind would have ordered evacuation. But logic had no place here. Only defiance. "Fire," Vance commanded. The ship shook as the railguns unleashed their fury. Hypersonic slugs tore through the void, slamming into the lead Zarnok cruiser. Its shields flickered before rupturing, explosions rippling along its hull. The behemoth listed, atmosphere venting from gaping wounds. For the first time, the aliens hesitated. Vance seized the moment. "Bring us about, evasive pattern theta. Keep firing." The Courage roared forward, engines burning with reckless determination. Plasma bolts grazed its flanks, leaving molten scars, but it refused to fall. More rounds ripped into enemy ranks, carving through metal and flesh alike. Yet, the cost was mounting. The ship groaned under the strain, alarms wailing as power reserves dipped into the red. The crew fought to keep systems online, patching hull breaches, overriding critical failures. Then, a transmission echoed through the comms, a deep, guttural growl, translated into words. "Foolish humans. Your end is inevitable." Vance exhaled sharply, gaze locked on the enemy fleet. He wasn't fighting for survival. He was fighting to prove one truth. Humanity never surrendered. The Zarnok responded with ruthless precision. Plasma lances streaked across the void, their fiery trails illuminating the battlefield. Shields flared as the Courage absorbed the first wave, but it wouldn't hold for long. The alien fleet had regrouped, correcting their earlier miscalculation. Now, they came in force. Multiple bogies inbound, Rivera called out, voice tight. "They're adapting." They always did. The Zarnok weren't mindless brutes. Their doctrine was built on overwhelming force, crushing opposition through sheer firepower. Against a lone Corvette, they had every advantage. Except one. Vance adjusted course, his mind working faster than the targeting systems. "Feed me a trajectory," tight slingshot around that derelict carrier. The engines flared as Courage banked hard, skimming the ruined husk of a fallen warship. Enemy sensors scrambled, momentarily losing their lock. The Zarnok hesitated, their rigid formations struggling to adjust. That was their flaw. They fought like a hammer, powerful, but predictable. Humans. They were the blade. The Corvette rolled into position, launching a spread of torpedoes. They weaved through enemy ranks, detonating with pinpoint accuracy. A destroyer buckled, its hull splitting in two. Another veered off course, colliding with one of its own fighters. The chaos bought seconds Courage couldn't afford to waste. Rivera's fingers danced across the console. 2 cruisers flanking starboard. We can't outrun them. We don't need to. Vance's eyes locked onto the tactical display. Reroute power to aft thrusters, bring us to a dead stop on my mark. She hesitated, then nodded. Ready. Mark. The Courage braked hard. The sudden deceleration sent the Zarnok cruisers hurtling past, their weapons still trained on empty space. The Corvette pivoted, railguns roaring as they unleashed hell into exposed flanks. 1 cruiser detonated instantly, a fireball consuming its bulk. The other spiraled out of control, venting debris before vanishing into the void. The crew barely had time to register the victory before impact warnings screamed through the ship. The enemy had recalibrated. A heavy plasma round slammed into the hull, rupturing a lower deck. Fires raged, emergency seals barely holding the breach. Structural integrity failing, Rivera shouted over the alarms. We can't take another hit like that. Vance clenched his jaw. The ship was breaking apart, but the Zarnok weren't slowing. They were probing for weakness, preparing the final blow. Sensors show movement in their formation, Rivera added, eyes widening. They're repositioning, pulling back. A flicker of doubt crossed Vance's mind. Retreat wasn't in their nature. Not unless. They're afraid, he murmured. The realization settled over the bridge like a spark in dry tinder. The Zarnok had thrown everything at them. A lone Corvette should have been nothing more than an afterthought. Instead, it had carved through their ranks, outmaneuvering, outwitting, outlasting. And now, for the first time, the invincible Armada hesitated. The Zarnok fleet wavered. Their relentless assault had stalled, formations unraveling under the weight of something they had never encountered before: doubt. A single Earth Corvette had withstood their might, striking harder than they believed possible. Their discipline faltered, a crack in the foundation of their unstoppable war machine. Vance saw the shift and pressed the advantage. Target their lead vessels. Make them bleed. The Courage surged forward, its remaining weapons firing with ruthless precision. Railgun slugs punched through armor plating, torpedoes found weak points in alien hulls. A command frigate took a direct hit, its bridge incinerated in a burst of molten debris. Without orders, the warships behind it hesitated, breaking formation. The Zarnok had always fought under the belief that sheer power would crush any resistance. They had never accounted for an enemy that refused to break. Their doctrine, built on certainty, now worked against them. Uncertainty spread through their ranks like a virus. Rivera's voice cut through the noise. We're picking up intercepted transmissions. They're arguing. Vance allowed himself a grim smile. No unity. No cohesion. The Zarnok had never needed to debate a battle before. Now, they were scrambling for answers. That was their weakness. Feed them more confusion, he ordered. Broadcast false distress signals. Let them think we have reinforcements inbound. Within moments, the deception took hold. Zarnok sensors registered phantom energy spikes, misleading them into believing an Earth fleet was closing in. Their response was immediate: uncertainty turned to fear. A frigate broke ranks, its engines flaring as it withdrew from battle. Others wavered, unsure whether to press forward or retreat. Then the true turning point came. A Zarnok battleship, its hull scarred from the fight, turned away from the engagement and vanished into the void. Rivera's breath hitched. Did they just retreat? A single ship breaking rank might be hesitation. A second meant fear. But when an entire wing of the fleet began pulling away, the truth was undeniable. The Zarnok were losing their will to fight. Vance's grip tightened. They're not unbreakable. They just never met someone willing to break them first. More warships peeled away, their retreat accelerating. Those that remained were leaderless, scattered, vulnerable. The invincible war machine had fractured under the weight of its own arrogance. But Courage was barely holding together. Damage reports scrolled across every screen: hull breaches, failing systems, reactor strain at critical levels. One more direct hit, and the ship would be nothing more than dust in the void. Rivera turned to him, exhaustion in her eyes. We can't chase them. No, Vance agreed. But we don't need to. The The battle wasn't over, but the war had shifted. Humanity had done the impossible. The Zarnok weren't just retreating. They were running. The last remnants of the Zarnok fleet lingered, caught between instinct and fear. Their war doctrine had never accounted for defeat, yet the wreckage of their fallen ships painted a stark reality. What should have been a swift extermination had become a nightmare. Their invincible armada had been broken not by a fleet, not by overwhelming force, but by a single human warship that refused to die. But the Courage was barely holding together. Hull fractures spread like spiderwebs, warning lights bathed the bridge in red, and the reactor core pulsed dangerously close to collapse. The ship had given everything. It had nothing left. Vance exhaled slowly, his gaze locked on the dwindling enemy fleet. They were hesitating, but hesitation was not surrender. If they regained their resolve, even for a moment, the Corvette wouldn't survive another engagement. They needed a final blow. Divert all power to engines, Vance ordered. One last push. Rivera didn't question it. There was no room for doubt. Energy reserves drained into the thrusters, the ship groaning under the demand, but it moved. Faster than the Zarnok expected. Faster than they could react. The Corvette burned toward the nearest command vessel, a crippled but still operational dreadnought. Enemy turrets scrambled to track the sudden acceleration, but it was too late. The Courage was already in position. Vance activated the last payload, a controlled reactor overload. The ship's remaining torpedoes detonated at once, fueling a chain reaction of energy feedback. The Corvette became a living weapon, releasing one final, devastating burst. The dreadnought took the full force of the blast. Its shields shattered, its hull ruptured, and within moments, its entire structure collapsed in a cascading inferno. The flagship of the Zarnok fleet was no more. Silence followed. Then movement. The remaining enemy ships turned and fled, their formations dissolving into disorderly jumps into deep space. No counterattack. No attempt to recover. Only retreat. Vance let out a slow breath. It was over. The bridge was silent except for the flickering of failing systems. Fires burned unchecked in distant corridors. The ship had given everything, and now it was dying. Rivera's voice broke through. Escape pods are still operational. There was nothing left to fight for. The battle was won. He gave the order. What little remained of the crew abandoned the ship, escape pods ejecting into the void. From the viewport, Vance watched as the UNS Courage, the ship that had defied the impossible, drifted one last time before the reactor finally collapsed. A silent explosion consumed the Corvette, taking with it the last trace of its defiance. But its legacy would endure. Across the stars, the story of the lone human warship that had made the Zarnok flee would spread. It would be whispered in fear among alien war councils. Humanity was not to be underestimated. Not now. Not ever.